The weather last weekend was fantastic in Colorado. The flowers were growing, the birds were chirping, the animals were calling, and all the motorcycles were out, including me. But unfortunately, I didn't really get to enjoy that ride as much because in the back of my head was a tremendous amount of imposter syndrome. And on Sunday, I started scrolling through my wonderful little tweets and I came across one that did not help. So in that video, we're going to talk about that tweet, why imposter syndrome happens, why the online community space needs to build infrastructure to prevent this from happening in the future, and how we as community managers can handle that imposter syndrome in the meantime. Hello everyone, welcome to the Socially Constructed YouTube channel. My name is Samantha Vania Logan, and let me tell you, it's been a big week for the Socially Constructed Discord. We launched a metrics course that is completely free and available for you to take. We started an entirely new cohort specifically for measuring and building online community platforms, and we've also built an entire research forum into the online community Discord. If you want to join it and see all of those updates, click right here and subscribe to see what else we're going to be doing over the course of the next week. Now, Brian's tweet was basically him stating that a certain modicum of expertise involved in being a community requires that we actually vet and understand and authentically approach the concept of being an expert. He's been doing so much for community over the course of the past 5 years that I've been following him. I consider him among the old guard. Rosie Sherry, John O'Bacon, Carrie Melissa Jones, Erica Cool. And all of these people have done incredible things to build their following slowly but surely. They've proven that they have the capacity to build online communities. They've failed in public where we can see it happen. They've discussed what they learned from those failures. And then when they went on to make it right, they discovered success in a way that we can repeat in order to create our own community spaces. Brian has further clarified this tweet by saying, quote, "My objection is that people fire off absolutes and attempts to be profound without having the resume and experience to back it up. As usual, these people are extrapolating what worked for one community across an entire slew of larger communities. We're in an expertise bubble, and we have a lot of experts coming into the space, new consultants, new teachers, new people. I am one of them. And I want to be clear here. I don't think he's wrong. So first and foremost, I want to talk in this video about the concept of institutional trust. This larger idea that we need to build systems to make it easier for us to vet expertise. And then I also want to talk about what imposter syndrome and expertise looks like in the absence of that institutional trust. And of course, I'm going to end this video by talking about what we can do in order to contribute to the overall health and well-being of the industry space as we co-iteratively learn what it means to build this virtual world. Now, I want to view Brian's tweet as a symptom within our community through a specific lens. And it's a lens that we've seen before with the Edelman's Trust Barometer 2022. We discussed specifically something called institutional trust. If you've ever gone into your family doctor, you've seen that family doctor is wearing a white lab coat, and that on its own apprises a certain level of authority. But anyone can get a white lab coat, and a lot of people are convinced that a white lab coat means authority. In fact, there's been a lot of psychological studies about that. But what's really attributing the capacity for you to trust your doctor isn't the lab coat. It's the sewn-in badge on their coat. These titles essentially state that this person has gone through an institution and come out the other end with a certification that allows them to operate a medical service. And because they've operated a medical service, they are now beholden to HIPAA law, FDA, FCC, and all of the other items simply by having an MD, PhD kind of title. This is institutional trust. And their specialty is labeled right there on the white lapel of their lab coat, which allows you to say, okay, I think that this person is qualified to give me the information that I need. We're also familiar with this in the marketing and online community space. A guy noticed that there was a specific kind of snake oil being sold among Asian American markets, very culturally based, very historically operated, but it came from a specific kind of snake. And he thought to himself, well, snake is a snake is a snake. So he went and he started advertising a snake that was boiled in water, came up, scraped the fat off, put it into an oil canister, started selling it right in there, and everyone, because they watched him slather it on his own skin, considered him now an expert of snake oils, and he sold it. And the FDA said, no. Don't get me wrong, we cannot get rid of snake oil salespeople, and we definitely can't get rid of homeopathic remedies all over the internet. Institutional trust should be able to help vet the voices of community managers coming up in the space by allowing those people to be authentic and sharing their failures, their successes, and be judged and reviewed by their peers to determine whether or not their voice is appropriate. It's institutional trust that at the moment, we don't really have. You could solve this by creating an institution in which you can learn community management, basically a degree path within academics. You could also do it within the free markets by having specific institutions that we trust, like Fever-Bee, Community Leadership Institute, CMX, create incredible certifications and then allowing those certifications by way of approving people to determine who you should trust and who you shouldn't. Ultimately, because these are all in different spaces and because different experts create communities in different ways, we don't have institutional trust with which to determine expertise. That causes a problem, not just on a societal level, symptomatic of what Brian is saying, but also on a personal level. Let's talk now about the namesake of this video, imposter syndrome. In the lack of institutional trust, imposter syndrome is more than capable of running rampant. And usually the imposter syndrome tends to be felt by people who have the credentials or have done the work or have succeeded. But the big issue is in our handy little brains, our failures are felt way more than our successes. We level that out by focusing on our environment, getting feedback from people who are saying, oh, this content is amazing, or oh, you're an absolute genius, or hey, I implemented on your strategy and it looks like it actually worked and our community grew. And these environmental impacts allow you to collect accolades to say more or less, I know what I'm doing. But when we don't provide that feedback, when we choose to be positive about everything, when we allow people to have presentations and talk about things that they're not necessarily experts in, but we don't provide negative feedback, that imposter syndrome is going to get ingrained. We, as humans, rely on our environment to provide us the feedback necessary to tell us how we're doing. In the absence of that feedback, in the absence of institutional trust, we are left to have to guess, and we are normally our worst critics. This is what leads to imposter syndrome proper. The notion that any of our actions and behaviors within a specific environment are actually just luck of the draw. They're not actually attributed to our own successes. We were just lucky, or we're being placed on a pedestal that we can't possibly live up to. I feel that one quite considerably. And a lot of this has to do with how we attribute and gauge our own successes and our own failures. There are two kinds of success that we're talking about here. And Brian's tweet also alludes to this. Quote, "There's too much talking about the work rather than doing the work in sharing grounded insights." A lot of folks have been laid off and are working to brand themselves to pick up some work. There's nothing wrong with that as long as it's authentic and the advice actually comes from learned lessons in doing the actual work. What this alludes to is that there are two kinds of success. And because failures tend to be very resolute, you just didn't hit the mark that you intended to, and success tends to be very vague, we tend to discount one type of success and focus way too much on the other type. The first kind of success is lived experience. This is you've gone forward, you've attempted to accomplish a thing, and you either succeeded or you failed. And we really, really focus on in my experience, in my personal work. And that's what this question is. What are 5 things that you've done, right? This is about the lived experience, actually implementing and actually working. This is also considered the most valuable of successful experience for you to list in those 5 areas. Oftentimes, people forget about the second kind of experience, which is learned experience. Learned experience is a collective engagement. You're not always failing or succeeding on your own when you run a program. When I was working for Keystone Symposia and me and my team were all putting together a virtual events platform that could potentially run 65 events in a period of 9 months, I cannot tell you how many of those events actually failed to reach the registration mark. But I also wasn't the one who was talking to the organizers of the event who were like, oh, this is incredible. I have had incredibly high quality conversations with all of these incredible new scientists coming into the space. The only thing that I had to gauge my success, quote unquote, was that singular number, which I was responsible for getting up into the right. How many registrants could I have? Because I didn't see the more vague learned experience of what Nick, Shannon, Josh, and I were building together on a qualitative scale, I hit myself really, really hard about the failure in the one singular metric that I could tangibly see: the amount of people joining the event. Since then, as a community manager, I recognize that the quality of an event is what's going to keep people coming back, and therefore it's the quality of the event that determines my lifetime value over the course of my time at Keystone Symposia. In other words, the sustainability of the program. Because this wasn't a primary focus, the learned experience that Shannon and Nick had was more vague than the lived experience I had of that singular number. I didn't want to attribute my success at Keystone Symposia to one of the 5 things I've done. This is what led to my imposter syndrome. I didn't attribute the successes I had at Keystone Symposia to the same level as my experience with anything else I've actually succeeded at. So without institutional trust, how are you supposed to trust your brain when they make these decisions and you don't know about it? Here are my 3 pieces of advice. The first one is a more personal and interpersonal thing. What I call this is, it's the feedback you're getting. If your brain is going off and you're having a lot of anxiety and imposter syndrome, start to look toward your environment. In the lack of institutional trust, you are not getting as many signals from your environment about your justification. But the reality is your brain is just lying to you about the subtler fashions of verifying that you know what you're talking about. Set up actual meetings with people who come to your talk. Ask them what you liked and what you didn't like. Ask them to do a keep, start, stop. Do a net promoter score survey so that you have these environmental features that give you the feedback to tell your brain it's lying to you. What you're doing here is replacing the higher level of institutional trust with a more colloquial understanding of peer review. The second thing harkens back to that lived versus learned experience, whereas lived experience tends to be felt really hard, viscerally, and clearly, while learned experience is very vague. Very rarely do humans ever fail or succeed in a vacuum. It is never one person's fault, and even when an expert fails, which happens all of the time, it usually occurs because other people view them as an expert and go, well, we're just going to trust you on this. We're not going to say anything. I don't care if you're Brian Oblinger or the person who prompted this tweet. It doesn't matter. Everyone is susceptible to this problem. So what you want to do is think abundantly and co-iteratively. Recognize that a large majority of those vague and transient failures and successes are felt together, and that your imposter syndrome is happening because you've isolated yourself from that situation and from the context of your thoughts. And the third piece of advice I actually just heard offhandedly in a private meeting with a man that I'm going to be sharing the stage with at Clicks in like 10 days. Register down below. His name is Chris Catania, and he has this very, very firm belief that before you can be a good community leader or an expert of community, you need to be a brilliant community member. So when you struggle to understand your expertise and you're not really too sure if you cut muster and you match Brian's requirements for being a proper expert, think to yourself and say, Brian's not looking for you to hit a specific level of expertise. He's looking for you to be an authentic member of community and share your insights based upon your current perspective. Before trying to tout being an expert, tout being a really brilliant member Ultimately, and in conclusion, there's not really much that you can do if you're an expert or a new voice in the space. So here's how I'm taking Brian's message to heart. I'm being more transparent about my failures and successes. I'm building a research center so that I can actively learn co-iteratively with all of you how to do this community thing. As an expert, I'm being very transparent with you about what I'm really bad at, like community facilitation. Lastly, I'll just leave you with one of my favorite adages I have ever had that is really helps me understand what it means to be an expert on the community stage. If you want to be a giant, find someone else to stand on your shoulders. So in that vein, next week we're going to publish the Edelman's Trust Barometer for 2023. But the week after that, I'm going to share a video with you from Mary Blessing Akoli, who did this incredible community unconference talk. And I am so excited to bring it to you on this channel. So make sure that you subscribe. And here's the Edelman's Trust Barometer for 2022. Here's the one for 2023. And I certainly hope that I helped with your imposter syndrome today.